has been created. But the Cold War is over. For global tech to survive, new markets must be found.
Small Soldiers followed a line of dangerous action figures accidentally programmed with high-tech military microchips, making them dangerous. It is the kind of movie you get lost in, especially if you watched it as a child back in the late 90s. Like many of Dante's other films, such as Gremlins, Small Soldiers is action-packed and follows the dangers of toys coming to life. This fascinating storyline is enough to draw you in, but here are 20 facts you didn't know about Small Soldiers that just might draw you in even more. Body 1. It has a connection to Gremlins. Aside from the fact that Small Soldiers shares the same talented director as Gremlins, there might be another connection you missed between both of these films. It turns out that Small Soldiers has several clever callbacks to Joe Dante's earlier hit film, Gremlins, scattered throughout the film, serving as fun Easter eggs for fans to discover. Just in case you blinked and missed it, one of the most obvious nods to Gremlins comes when a Gizmo toy, the adorable Mogwai at the center of Gremlins, is spotted in the trash. If you don't think about it too much, it is just a visual gag, but it carries so much more weight symbolically. It illustrates how quickly toys that were once loved are discarded when a new, shiny one appears. There's also a sneaky reference when one character casually mentions that his computer password is Gizmo. This is another nod to Dante's 1984 classic. These small details have even sparked a theory that Small Soldiers could almost be considered a secret sequel to Gremlins. Both of these movies tap into a familiar element of childhood, such as owning a pet or playing with action figures, and then turn it into a cautionary tale. Another similarity is the presence of strong-willed mothers. In Gremlins, Billy's mother defends her home from weird creatures in an unforgettable manner, while in Small Soldiers, Alan's mother helps fight off the super-violent toy soldiers. 2. Real toys inspired the movie. One fact that might get lost on you, especially if you're a new fan, is that the action figures in Small Soldiers were actually heavily influenced by real-life toys that were popular in the market during the 1960s to 1980s. The military, like Commando Elite, was modeled after the legendary G.I. Joe line. Their smaller and modern look is uncanny with the 3.75-inch G.I. Joes that became hugely popular in the 1980s, while their bigger and bulkier designs are a nod to the original 12-inch figures from the 1960s. By creating characters based on both eras of G.I. Joe, the film was able to create a space for audiences who grew up playing with them. On another note, the monstrous yet lovable Gorgonites drew inspiration from Mattel's Masters of the Universe toy line, which had outrageous-looking creatures, weird hybrids, and fantasy-inspired designs. What you might find clever about Small Soldiers is the way it reverses expectations. The Commando Elites, with their solid soldier-like appearances, are framed as the villains, while the strange Gorgonites, who basically look like monsters, are actually the good guys you should root for. This reversal was the perfect way to reinforce one of the film's focal points, which says appearances can be deceiving, and what looks powerful or heroic on the surface may be hiding something darker. 3. It fueled merchandising madness. Back when Small Soldiers hit theaters in 1998, it wasn't just another movie, it was a complete marketing powerhouse. Burger King famously ran a huge promotion with collectible toys, but they weren't the only company cashing in on the merchandise. Kenner, a toy company already legendary for creating Star Wars figures, launched its own line of Small Soldiers figures. It was a whole thing, and the irony of it all was that these were action figures based on movie characters who themselves were action figures. The Kenner toys were impressive all around. They had bulky builds, impressive paint jobs, and they paid intricate attention to details, making them perfect display pieces. However, collectors and kids quickly realized they weren't as good as they thought. Unlike the bendable and posable toys they were inspired by, these figures were stiff. They were therefore more suitable for sitting on shelves rather than for playing battles. The merchandising didn't stop there. The film also led to a PlayStation game, which gave players the chance to control familiar faces like Chip Hazard, as well as new characters that had never even appeared in the movie. It was a decent game at the time. It featured colorful graphics and enjoyable combat. It was also great that Tommy Lee Jones reprised his role as Chip Hazard. This made the game feel more authentic. A Game Boy version was also released, and this time it was a straightforward side-scrolling adventure, starring Archer. 4. There was a reworked poster. At first, when Small Soldiers was nearing its release date, the studio wanted to market it with a bold, action-packed promotional poster. The original design featured Chip Hazard pointing a gun directly sideways at the viewer, a pose that immediately conveyed an aggressive and militarized personality to the character. However, when the artwork was reviewed, concerns were quickly brought up, and they were worried that the imagery leaned too heavily into violence, especially given the fact that the movie was being marketed as a family-friendly summer release. The executives began to worry that parents might view it as inappropriate for children, and they couldn't have that, so they decided to tone it down. They decided to go for a reworked version of the poster, in which the gun was entirely removed. There was still a problem with the poster after that. It seemed like Chip's stance still suggested he was gripping something, almost making it look as though he was holding onto an invisible weapon. While it was toned down and the weapon was removed, the change left the artwork looking a bit awkward. And today, many fans consider it one of the strangest pieces of marketing from that time. 5. It had a classic rock soundtrack. When it came to music, Small Soldiers didn't just rely on its orchestral score. Instead, it also leaned into the world of classic rock to give the movie an extra edgy feeling and energy. The score was handled by the legendary Jerry Goldsmith, who had already made quite a name for himself with iconic film compositions in Alien, Star Trek, and The Omen. For Small Soldiers, Goldsmith decided to create a unique sound that fit perfectly to complement the suburban setting, with the chaotic action figure warfare unfolding. His music gave the film a sense of both whimsy and menace, and it also made scenes that might have felt too light or too dark more balanced. The best part of it all was the soundtrack of licensed rock tracks. The album featured a combination of older classics, remixes, and new versions. It created a space for many generations of music lovers to feel welcome. Because of the film, fans were able to enjoy War by Bone Thugs-n-Harmony, featuring Henry Rollins, which gave a modern hip-hop feel to a protest anthem. Other sounds worthy of note include Queen's Another One Bites the Dust, which gave the film an immediately known energy. Then there was Pat Benatar's Love is a Battlefield, which underscored the film's ironic approach to toy combat. One of the biggest surprises was the inclusion of Communication Breakdown by Led Zeppelin. The band was known to be selective about licensing their music, so it was a big deal that Small Soldiers made it happen. 6. Small Soldiers had a surprising voice cast. While Small Soldiers is known for its memorable live-action lineup of stars, which includes a young Kirsten Dunst as Phil Hartman in one of his final film roles, and Dennis Leary as the cutthroat corporate executive behind the toy line, the real treasure is actually in the voice cast, and not many people know this. The film was able to assemble an incredible lineup of unexpected and brilliant talent, giving all the toy characters their amazing personalities. One name that instantly comes to mind is Tommy Lee Jones, who brought his trademark matter-of-fact intensity to the role of Chip. The icing on the cake is that the rest of the Commando Elite, led by Chip, were voiced by surviving members of the classic 1967 war movie, The Dirty Dozen. This went beyond mere stunt casting. It was a clever nod to film history, as these actors were now voicing miniature soldiers programmed for destruction. Also, the gentle yet misunderstood leader of the Gorgonites, Archer, was voiced by the incredibly charismatic and warm Frank Langella. The quirky twist at the end is that the rest of the Gorgonites were voiced by the cast of This Is a Spinal Tap, including Michael McKean, Harry Shearer, and Christopher Guest. This means the movie basically staged a bantering showdown between the Dirty Dozen and Spinal Tap. Even the Gwendy dolls were voiced by Christina Ricci and Sarah Michelle Gellar, both rising stars of the late 90s. 7. The Spielbergs were uncredited. One of the most surprising facts about Small Soldiers is the quiet yet significant role the Spielberg family played in making this film. Firstly, Steven Spielberg, the legendary director behind Jaws, E.T., and Jurassic Park, was involved with the film in the role of an uncredited executive producer. This fact is even more interesting because the movie was distributed by DreamWorks Pictures and Amblin Entertainment, which are two companies that he himself co-founded and frequently used to back his projects. On a normal day, Spielberg is a name that is seen as a powerful marketing tool, and attaching a film to his name is a guarantee that you will get extra attention from both critics and audiences. However, in this case, his name was completely left off the official credits. This wasn't an isolated incident, as it turns out that Spielberg had also taken a similar low-profile role on other Joe Dante projects, such as Gremlins and Inner Space. However, those movies actually included him in the credits, which is why his uncredited role on Small Soldiers is more surprising. Adding to this fact, Spielberg's sister, Anne Spielberg, also played a part in the creation of Small Soldiers. She co-wrote certain parts of the script, but like her brother, her contribution went uncredited. The decision to leave Spielberg uncredited is unusual and feels like a missed opportunity, but ultimately, there's probably a valid reason behind it. 8. CGI was used. If you know a lot about the world of practical effects, you would have heard of the makeup effects legend, Stan Winston. He was a pioneer in practical effects, known for bringing creatures to life in popular films such as The Terminator, Aliens, and Jurassic Park. He was also originally hired to design and build the animatronic puppets for Small Soldiers, and his team began creating fully articulated working models of the Commando Elites and the Gorgonites. They gave the toys a physical presence that felt authentic and creepingly alive. Simply put, their puppetry work was beyond impressive. Basically, when the figures moved, they looked like real toys straight out of their packaging, but with just enough exaggerated gestures to also convey personality. However, during filming, the production team ran into a major problem. While the puppets looked great in close-ups and controlled shots, they were difficult to maneuver for complicated scenes that involved actions and stunts. This was around the time computer-generated imagery was becoming more reliable and cost-effective. At that time, the difficult work of operating and filming puppets was nothing in comparison to the ease with which CGI could accomplish the same task with less hassle. As a result, the filmmakers decided to move away from puppetry and toward digital effects. The director, Joe Dante, later admitted that the finished movie was roughly 1/3 puppetry and 2/3 CGI. 9. There was a Burger King backlash. When Small Soldiers came out in theaters, Burger King signed what seemed to be a solid partnership. The fast food giant tied the film to the launch of its brand new Rodeo Burger, and it offered collectible Small Soldier toys in its kids' meals. It was the perfect marketing strategy. A major studio film with flashy merchandise and a few menu items that Burger King hoped would top its rival McDonald's promotions. However, things got interesting with this surprise. Small Soldiers wasn't rated PG, unlike Burger King thought. Instead, it landed in the PG-13 category because of its darker tone, violence, and satirical form. Suddenly, Burger King found itself in an awkward position. It was promoting toys for a movie that parents probably didn't want their younger children to see. This immediately caused friction between the fast food chain and the filmmakers. To handle the backlash, Burger King included a printed disclaimer with the toys. It carefully explained that while the toys are suitable for children of all ages, the movie Small Soldiers may contain material that is inappropriate for younger children. Despite the use of a disclaimer, some franchise locations weren't comfortable with participating in the campaign. In fact, a relatively small number of restaurants switched out the Small Soldier toys and replaced them with safer and more familiar Mr. Potato Head figures. 10. There was a shift in tone. One of the most interesting aspects of Small Soldiers is its unusual tonal balance, which comes across as an imbalance. Through the years, audience members and critics have all noted that the movie sometimes feels like it is stuck between two completely different identities. Sometimes it seems like a lively, good old, light-hearted kid's adventure with talking toys and humor. In the same instant, it also feels like the story is much darker, with sequences that blend the elements of a horror film and a social satire piece. This tonal shift is sharp and can be seen as a direct tug-of-war that probably happened behind the scenes. Joe Dante initially envisioned Small Soldiers as a darker project, one similar to his earlier hit film Gremlins. He planned to satirize the military-industrial complex and consumer culture by using the killer toys as a metaphor for how corporations market violence to children. However, as production went on, toy companies, fast food chains, and other sponsors became heavily involved. Since so much of the film's success came from merchandising, they had Dante and the studio to tone things down and make the movie more kid-friendly. They wanted it to be similar to Toy Story. However, at this point, it seemed a little too late because many of the disturbing scenes, such as the Frankenstein Barbie doll scene, had already been shot. Instead of reshooting the film completely, Dante was forced to compromise, so he cut what he could while retaining most of the original intensity. 11. It was Phil Hartman's final film role. The next fact is a tragic one, and it concerns Phil Hartman. Unfortunately, Small Soldiers was the final live-action film performance of the beloved comedian. He played Phil Fimple, the Abernathy family's neighbor who was always irritated and portrayed as slightly too perfect, and also the father of Alan's crush, Charity. His performance as the suburban dad who gets caught up in the toy war is the comedic center of the film. Hartman could deliver dry wit, and he also had a signature brand of subtle exasperation that was on full display for all to see. Whether he was just trying to protect his clean-cut lawn, or when he comedically confronted the tiny soldiers in a scene where they attempted to negotiate with him, his signature move was always to the point. There's no doubt about it, Hartman was a major talent in both sketch comedy and voice work, and he was also known for voicing characters like Troy McClure and Lionel Hutz on The Simpsons. His sudden and tragic passing in May of 1998, just 2 months before the film's release, was a tragic moment that put a dark shadow over the movie. The film is dedicated to his memory, and his role was a final and bittersweet show of his unique comedic talent and exceptional on-screen presence. 12. There was a crossover with Barbie dolls. One of the most unforgettable and almost weird scenes in Small Soldiers is when the Commando Elite, in need of reinforcements, finds a whole collection of Christie's Gwendy fashion dolls. As it turns out, the Gwendy dolls are actually an apparent parody of the famous Barbie brand, and in the film, they are immediately reprogrammed by the soldiers. In the crazy scene, the Commando Elite implants the military-grade chips into the heads of the dolls, inevitably transforming them from peaceful, regular fashion toys to crazy, combative soldiers. The dolls' sweet voices are then replaced with aggressive and creepy voices, and they are armed with various weapons. This scene remains one of the most clever and darkly humorous scenes in the whole film. In a way, it also speaks to how military themes somehow make their way into everyday life, and it also speaks to the sabotage of traditional gendered toys. The Gwendy doll's transformation into Barbie-like dolls is a visual metaphor for how even the most innocent children's toys can also be turned into military objects. This scene was yet another way the film chose to be satirical, all while shedding light on other heavy themes, including war and commercialization. 13. DreamWorks' answer to Toy Story. Small Soldiers was released in 1998, only a few years after the mind-blowing success Toy Story had with Pixar. At that time, DreamWorks was still a relatively new studio, so it was trying to find its footing as a major name in the world of animation and family entertainment. Toy Story had surely made an impact. It had also shown that a film about living toys could be a global phenomenon. This pushed DreamWorks to an opportunity, and they knew they had to create their own vision of that phenomenon. However, the vision director, Joe Dante, had a completely different one. While Toy Story was a heartfelt and whimsical story about the loyalty and friendship of toys, Small Soldiers was an almost cynical and satirical take on the military complex and the commercialization of war. They were polar opposites, but a vision needed to be executed. Instead of the toys getting along, Dante had the brilliant idea to let them engage in a violent and destructive war. The film's protagonist was not a toy, but a human boy who accidentally unleashed chaos. There is a crazy difference between the two films, and while they share the same groundwork, they are certainly worlds apart. While some people might see it as a copycat version of Toy Story, it is most certainly not, and it presents a more adult perspective on the idea of toys coming to life. 14. It is Tommy Lee Jones's only voice role. One thing Small Soldiers has in abundance is the number of talented actors in its roster, and one feature that stands out is from the acclaimed actor Tommy Lee Jones, who gave his voice to the film's main antagonist, Major Chip Hazard. While Jones has appeared in countless films, this is recorded as his only voice-only role in a major motion picture. His commanding voice was the perfect fit for the character Major Chip Hazard, the ruthless and unhinged leader of the Commando Elite. Jones was able to deliver a performance of a lifetime in this role. He delivered his lines with the perfect military precision and the perfect intensity it required. His delivery made Major Chip Hazard an accurate embodiment of a truly menacing personality, even with his small size. One of his most memorable scenes is when he delivers a strange yet patriotic monologue, pieced together roughly from historical military quotes. It was clear that Jones gave his all to the character he was playing. He infused the role with a surprising gravity that made the character more than just any regular toy villain. Because of the actor, his performance remains a major reason why Major Chip Hazard is still one of the most unforgettable antagonists in a family film from that era. It just goes to show how well Jones was able to carry a scene along with just his voice. 15. The Globotech Universe. The fictional megacorporation called Globotech, which essentially creates the Commando Elite and the Gorgonites in the film, is more than just a nonsensical plot device. It was actually a huge part of the film, which is why it is a recurring element in almost all of director Joe Dante's films, suggesting a shared universe here. The crossover of this corporation in Dante's films sets up an interesting precedent that you just can't help but love. This type of world building is the foundation of Dante's work and a smart way to link his films together with subtle references. As it stands, the Globotech company also appears in more projects directed by Dante, and this in itself creates a surreal reality for the audience. For example, the Globotech building is featured in his 2003 film Looney Tunes, Back in Action. The way the company appears in multiple films is somewhat of a running joke and a commentary on corporate power and its chaotic reach into every aspect of society, from toys to technology. The idea that a single sinister company is behind all the madness in his movies gives off an additional layer of storytelling, continuity, and context to his filmography. This then makes his works a super narrative about the dangers of uncontrolled corporate and military power. 16. The film was almost an R-rated horror movie. Before it was finalized as a PG-13 action comedy, the director, Joe Dante, had an initial vision for Small Soldiers that was way darker and more violent. He had initially pitched the idea of the film as an R-rated horror film, which was similar to his classic hit Gremlins, but with more intensity and a military-themed premise. The script had the most genuinely terrifying scenes where the Commando Elite would brutally destroy and dismember the Gorgonites, and their violent takeover of the Abernathy house was meant to be beyond scary. Dante wanted the film to be a serious, satirical commentary on the dangers of militarizing children's toys, and the violence was a sure way to convey his point. However, Universal Pictures and DreamWorks were not having it. They felt concerned that an R-rated movie would not be commercially viable, especially with the potential for a successful toy line. So they pushed for something different, and something that the families in the audience would feel more comfortable watching. They wanted the film to be more accessible and to have a family-friendly tone, so of course there were more rewrites and more cuts. A huge chunk of Dante's darker ideas remained in the film, but by the time the final film was ready, it was clear that it was a toned-down version of his original and scarier concept. The tension between his original idea and the final product is a primary reason why the film has a unique yet unsettling tone. 17. The screenwriter also wrote A Christmas Story. A team wrote the script for Small Soldiers of screenwriters, but one of the most notable names among them is Chris Columbus. He is credited with writing the beloved Christmas classic, A Christmas Story, in 1983. While it is apparent that these two films are completely different, in the sense that one is a nostalgic holiday story and the other is a satirical war film about living toys, they still share quite a common thread in their portrayal of childhood. Still, they share a notable similarity in that both films depict the imaginative and sometimes scary world of children and the toys and objects they interact with. However, Columbus's part in Small Soldiers was more about developing the original story concept rather than writing the final shooting script. He created the initial draft that explored the idea of toys coming to life. However, later on, writers like Gavin Scott and Adam Rifkin were brought on board to rework the story and add darker and more action-packed elements that would define the final film. Columbus's work on the initial story laid the foundation for the premise of the film, even if the final execution was a world away from the gentle humor of Ralphie Parker's quest for a BB gun. 18. A canceled video game spin-off was in the works. Like many popular films of that time, Small Soldiers was accompanied by several video games. They pulled off some games, but there was one major video game spin-off that was in development for the PlayStation 2, Xbox, and GameCube, developed by the studio 3Do. The game was supposed to be called Small Soldiers: Globotech War, and it was supposed to be a successful third-person shooter that would expand the universe of the film. It was also supposed to have a single-player portion that would allow players to control both Commando Elite and Gorgonite characters, offering a special and dual-perspective narrative. There were also plans for a well-rounded multiplayer mode that would have featured large-scale battles with dozens of characters on screen at once. However, due to significant financial troubles at the 3DO companies and several production setbacks, the game was ultimately canceled before it could be completed. This was a major disappointment for fans who had been eagerly awaiting the game's premiere. It was going to be the first major console game based on the movie, and it was going to give a much deeper look into the characters and their war, which is why fans were hurt that the game fell through. In the end, only a few demo builds and pre-release screenshots exist today, serving as a reminder of what fans could have had. 19. The voice of Archer was a newcomer. While popular actors voiced the Commando Elite and most of the Gorgonites, the voice of the film's protagonist, Archer, was a complete newcomer. Frank Langella voiced the role, but he did so in a uniquely distinctive way. The voice of the Gorgonite leader was achieved through a young boy's voice, provided by Ben Foster, and then recorded and digitally processed to create a more chaotic and unreal world. This was a deliberate choice to make Archer sound more innocent and less like a battled soldier with a hardened vibe. This then contrasted sharply with the booming voices of the Commando Elite. The processed voice gave Archer a unique character, making him sound both old and youthful at the same time. This was a fitting path for a character who is part of an old, tribal race of creatures. The creative use of voice modulation and sound design was a significant factor in making the Gorgonites distinct from their military counterparts. This also showcased the film's theme of innocence versus experience and good versus evil, with Archer's gentle, processed voice standing in stark contrast to the film's other characters, contrast to Major Chip Hazard's loud, aggressive commands. 20. Kirsten Dunst improvised a memorable line. Kirsten Dunst, who played the role of Christy Fimple in Small Soldiers, was a rising child star at the time, and she brought a natural and authentic quality to her performance. One of the film's most memorable and darkly humorous lines was a result of her improvisation. During the climactic battle inside the Fimple house, as the house is being torn apart by the warring toys, Christy's father, who Phil Hartman plays, screams about his prized lawnmower being destroyed. In response to that, Christy yells back, "It's a G.I. Joe, Dad. It's not a lawnmower." This line was not a part of the original script. It was actually a spontaneous reaction from Dunst to the chaos of the scene and Hartman's comedic yelling. Director Joe Dante loved the line so much that he kept it in the final cut. The line perfectly captures the frustration of a teenager trying to explain the reality of the situation to an adult who is more worried about his property. While it is a small moment in the film, it still showcases Dunst's comedic timing. It adds another layer of humor to the film, highlighting the peculiar difference between the kids who understand the toy war and the adults who are more concerned with the destruction of their property. Small Soldier is more than just a movie about toys. It packs a lot of information, and while it may not be the perfect movie, it is still fun and one of the best pieces of 90s nostalgia. It didn't resonate with everyone when it was released, but for everyone who grew up with it and those discovering it now, it has solidified itself as a cult classic that is now a fan favorite for many. What can you say about these weird facts? Share them in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe and like for more videos like this.